So welcome. This is Evesham Township's Finding Our History, Unearthing Evesham's History. And we are so excited for everybody to be here. My name is Heather Cooper. I am the Councilwoman of Evesham Township and your host this evening. We have amazing guests and many people who have stories to tell and share. We are really excited to have several people that I'd like to introduce. I want to first introduce the host tonight, Human Rights Advisory Chair, Coriel Vokoun, and she is labeled in the box. You can see our names, hopefully. We also have with us this evening, Damon Truitt, the direct descendant of the Truitt family of Evesham. You can wave hello, Damon.
Hello, good evening.
And then we also have Patti McGee Colston and Margaret Truitt McGee, who is 99 years young, family with roots in Evesham. You guys can wave hi. And Damon, you are actually in a different state right now, as well as Patti. Do you want to let us know where you're zooming in from?
Yes, I'm in Camden, New Jersey.
Okay.
Actually,
and I understand you're like
right
at work, right?
Yeah, at the firehouse.
Thank you for your time. And Patti and Margaret, you guys are?
We're in Sacramento, California, so it's 4:30-ish here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. We have other amazing guests. We have Paul Shope, who's in the center square on my screen. He is a historian. I'll let him introduce. He has a very vast background in many areas. He's going to share about Evesham's Kenilworth Road and the history of the African-American presence in the Milford area. We also have Alice Andrews, who is Evesham's Evans family and Quaker descendant. And then joining us a little later will be Dolly Marshall, who will discuss preserving African-American history. And we'll talk as we go about their background. They can share some of their bios with you. I am also joined by Stacy Webb, our Deputy Community Development Director. And also hosting with me is Zane Clark, our Public Information Director, who will help us with any technical issues. So you can check in the chat and there's some information there. We will be using some screen enabling documents and you'll be able to tag along with the pictures that go by. So Coriel will be able to share some of that. I want to share just for a few minutes. I have been a councilwoman here in Evesham for a little over 4 years, and we have many residents who are interested in history. One in particular that comes to mind that we can start to share and highlight is Shannon Higginbotham. She is a longtime farmer here in town, and her family have a long understanding of the history here in Evesham, otherwise known as Marlton. So for most people who don't know, Evesham and Marlton are the same town. Right before the pandemic, literally, I believe it was March 6th in 2020, she was able to have the honor and spend time with Louise Calloway. Louise was a great trailblazer and legacy on the history in Burlington County and the Underground Railroads. She went and visited her at the Burlington County Underground Railroad Museum and was very curious about areas in town that she really believed, through being a lifelong resident, that perhaps there was more history we had not uncovered with our African-American culture here, and that perhaps more stories had to be told. But we couldn't find the locations. We had heard there were underground railroad stops. We had some idea, and as a biracial woman with a strong knit family who knows our historic culture, my African-American culture, through my father's family, it was important to me initially, but more so important to the residents here in Evesham who wanted their stories told and wanted to feel included in the stories as a great part of our diversity here in Evesham. What started to happen, the pandemic hit, many social injustice were happening around the country, and in Evesham, we created a human rights advisory committee so that we could really hear from what was important to our residents, what people were passionate about, what they felt was missing. And we started to create opportunities to educate, create awareness, and tell the stories of people's lives here in Evesham and throughout New Jersey, that everyone that had the passion that we wanted to capture. So we talked to people like John Volpa, a resident and great historian who embraces all history here. But we all, if you know John, you know his love for the Black Run Preserve. So he started to do some research, I believe. There was a subcommittee that was created through our Human Rights Committee called the Diversity Inclusion Committee. I think they're kind of researching, let's say, these elements of our history structure. In the top of 2021, the mayor and council did a Underground Railroad stop tour and highlighted the places that we were able to identify through the work shared through the Evesham Historical Society. And people like Connie Evans, as well as I'm sure Alice had a hand, and many others in sharing what they knew and the stories they had captured through archives and many various documents, what we'll talk about this evening. From there, we wanted to create better storylines, better understandings, to have more of the story held within the town, and that people would want to come and learn more about what Evesham had to offer as it relates to their history. So tonight, these stories will be told, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to our Coriel, our moderator, Coriel Vokun, who will help guide the conversations this evening. So please enjoy, capture all that you can, and just know this is a recorded session and webinar that will be held on Evesham's Township website and shared as time goes on. So thank you so much for listening to me. Coriel, I turn it over to you.
Hi all, hope you're having a good night. I'm pretty excited to hear everything that the speakers are going to impart tonight. I just wanted to make sure if you can see the screen, just so that as they're talking, you can see the timeline that we created, so that you see some pictures that go along with the stories that they'll be telling. And if you would like to interact along with us, in the chat will be a link to that timeline. So just as you're talking, you can kind of immerse yourself in a little bit of their journey. So we're gonna start with Damon Truitt. And I'm just gonna ask you to talk a little bit about the history of your topic, how you got interested in it, how it connects to Evesham very closely, obviously. And then what's the legacy? What is important to you that you hope that people take from your story?
So I kind of got into the whole thing from my cousin Patti and my uncle Brian. They kind of brung me along and asked me if I wanted to be a part of the Ancestry, the Roots Less Traveled show, and that's how it all began. And during the show, we visited a place in Evesham called the Cropwell Meeting Center, and my family has history there. The meeting center is basically like church, but there's no pastor or anything. Anybody can stand up and speak. And I was told that my aunt Margaret actually went there, attended there, and one of my great grandfathers. It was pretty amazing to visit that place, because they had certain things on inside of the building that I was able to see, and it was a great experience. I actually have a plate from there that's on one of the walls that my cousin Patti gave me. And I think that's part of history. It's a picture, that the plate has a picture of the Cropwell Meeting Center from 1809, I believe. So that was interesting. The whole thing about the Cropwell Meeting Center was very interesting. And the legacy that my family has left from Evesham Township. It's still an ongoing journey to find out exactly how they migrated there and things of that nature. But I'm still in contact with Connie Evans, and we had lunch a while ago, and she actually took us to a place, a graveyard site where they're trying to preserve, where I found out a lot of my ancestors may have been buried at. So I think that was pretty interesting.
Thank you so much. I know that having, followed your story a little bit in the run up to this, that as an African American, a lot of our history is lost or hard to find. And some of our culture was stolen due to slavery. So when I hear stories like this and getting a chance to kind of track our ancestors' journey and see the plate, which we did include in the timeline, if you guys click on any of the circles that are around Damon's name, let's see, is it? You can click it. There we go. There's the plate. Just something like that. Just those types of artifacts are so important. So I'm so glad that you found them. And I'm going to be tracking your family's story as well, because it feels like my own. It feels like my own story. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. So the next person that we're going to talk to is Patti McGee Colston. I'm sorry, did I say your name right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask you the same thing. If you could let us know a little bit about your journey, how it began, what you learned, what you took from it, how your family processed the information and how it's related to Evesham, and then what you think that you want people to take away. What's the legacy?
Well, were you able to put up any of the pictures that I sent?
Yes. So if
So
we
my family dates back to 1834. Not that one. It's the one with it says Patriots on the front. Nope, not that one. Nope, not that one.
There's a bunch there.
Yeah, I didn't
Let's
send
see.
that one.
There we
There
go.
it is. Okay, so those are two of our Truitt ancestors who lived in Evesham during the 19th century. And we don't know who they are, but we do know that they're Truitts. That picture was generously shared with me from my cousin who lives in New Jersey, who chooses to be anonymous, but he has my grandfather's collection, and these two gentlemen are Truitts. We just don't know who. So our family has been free since at least 1760, and that is from our ancestor Abner Truitt, who was born actually in Cross Creek, Sussex County, Delaware, and who had 3 sons, Tillman, James, and I'll look, it's in here. It's in my book. So this is, the reason I called it Patriots was, it was originally called 146 Years of Freedom in Evesham Township. Well, as I began to continue to do my research, I found that not only was my family in Evesham for 90 years, but that Morristown is a separate township. So my family ultimately in 1915 migrated to Morristown Township, which is where my mom was born. She says Chester Township. And that's one of the things I learned as I was doing my research. Boundaries change, county, city, rural. It was a very rural location. Names can be misspelled. It was not until just recently that I found out that the reason I couldn't find my 1760 ancestor was because his name was misspelled. So I finally found out. But Tillman Truitt was the oldest son of Abner, who came to Evesham Township sometime in the early 1800s. We know for sure he was there in 1834 because he purchased 2.5 acres of land from John and Rebecca Evans along the Black Run River, where they farmed cranberries and high berries. And so, and this was 100 years before my mother was born, literally. So we have 4 generations, 90 years in Evesham. 1840, Tillman's son Major is 28 years old, living in Evesham with his wife Julia Ann. She was 22 and their children. By 1849, my great grandfather was born, and that's Joshua Truitt. That's my mom's grandfather, who she never met because he died in 1901. So 1849, which is before California even became a state, my family was there. My great-grandfather, Joshua, was born on October 10th in Evesham. And at the time, the population was 5,000. And funny, the census taker was an Evans. So in 1860, Major Sr. had a son named Virginia, and they both were living in Evesham Township, and they both owned property. So if you could put up that atlas page with Damon pointing out the, yeah, right under Damon's name. His finger's pointing to on the map. Yeah, that's the atlas from 1867. And that's the atlas page showing the property ownership of Major Jr. and Major Sr. Joshua was just 21 at the time. So by 1870, Major was a 58-year-old farm laborer with an estate of $300. And his son was a 23-year-old farm laborer with an estate of $100. So by 1880, Major Sr. was 68 years old. He was still working as a laborer. And he lived on an integrated street in Milford with people from Germany, Australia, Ireland. And by 1895, Joshua and his wife Mary had 3 children. And their youngest son at this time was my grandfather, my mom's father, Clement Levis Truitt. And I don't know if you're able to get that picture in. I sent that picture there. William Evans was the census taker in New Jersey for the New Jersey State Census at that time in 1895. My family went to integrated schools there in Evesham. We have the school census records. They could all read, write. And by 1900, Joshua was a 49-year-old farmer with his wife, Mary, and she was 38. They had a total of 5 children. And Joshua would pass away in 1901, leaving a widow with 4 children. So by 1910, we find my family living in Evesham at the Hillside Farm location with the Evans family, Alice Evans Andrews family. And at that time, my great aunt Blanche, my mother's aunt, was 17, and my grandfather Clement was 16. And he worked in the stables. He learned everything about horses: grooming, breeding, training, caring for. So much to the point to where when my grandfather became an adult, he later opened the Morristown Riding Academy in the 1940s. His love for horses was passed to his youngest son, my Uncle Kenny, my mother's youngest brother, who ultimately became a harness riding driver. I thought they were jockeys, but he says they're called drivers. So by 1915, my grandfather Clement had been donated a home that was bought by his mother, that his mother was able to buy from working at the Evans farm. And my grandfather, my mom's father, got married. So his mom gave him the house. And she married Perry Jackson, and they had a home in Crescent. And I sent you that picture. That was the picture of the home that you just flipped by a minute ago. Yeah, so that's my mom's grandmother, Clement's mother, Mary Jackson. Now she's married to the elderly gentleman you see sitting in the chair, Perry Jackson, and the little boy is named Vernon Jackson. And then I was told, because after doing Ruthless Travel, I was able to find I had lots of new cousins. And one of my cousins said, that's Vernon Jackson, who later had a son named Vernon Jackson, who continued to live in the Crescent area, I believe until the 1970s. So around the turn of the century, my family moved to Morristown, but my great grandmother, Mary, you see there, is buried in Crescent, and we believe it is at that cemetery that Dolly, one of your other guests, is looking to preserve. And ironically, our connection to the Evans family continued through 1933. And that was when Ruth Evans, who was a visiting nurse, took care of my aunt, my mother's youngest sister, Barbara, as part of the Morristown Visiting Nurses. And we found a publication with their picture together with Ruth Evans holding baby Barbara Truitt. And that was really another profound moment for us. So with all of the things that we did produce another show. It's called Legacy List. It's on PBS, which you can watch online. And it highlights some of the items because my mother was able to continue to care for some of these cherished items that were used by her ancestors in New Jersey for 100 years.
Yeah. You told it all so well. There's not much more I can say.
Well,
Oh, we can't hear you too well, guys.
we started this kind of as my mom wanted to have her DNA tested as kind. It wasn't a joke, but just, you know, she was turning 95, so she thought it would be fun. So we used the census records, U.S. Census, the state census records, all the public records we could find, along with family photographs and artifacts that had been passed down. And I just compiled them together in what I'm calling a book. It's really a chronological listing of our family's history there in Evesham Township and in Morristown or Chester Township. I'm still learning.
It's Morristown. It changed from Chester to Morristown while we were still in elementary school.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's our story, and we're honored to be a part of this project. Webinar today. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have. We're looking forward to continuing on with this storytelling. It's fascinating. It's really been life-changing for us.
Thank you so much, Patti. This is so amazing. What great information. I mean, the fact that you have over 100 years of history is so unique and original in our community. I just wanted to let everybody that's tuning in know that if you go to contact us, if you click on that where you are at home, some of the information that Patti talked about is there, so you can explore a little bit more. Thank you so much. And thank you to your mom for coming on and really getting the ball rolling on some of this and sharing so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the next person that we have that's going to speak a little is Paul Shope. I hope I'm saying your name right, who is a historian and the assistant director of the South Jersey Culture and History Center. So Paul, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of information about this area and some of the rich African-American history that's kind of embedded.
Sure, be happy to do that. Last name's pronounced Shop, just like you're going shopping. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So my interest in the Milford area began probably in 1992. I've been researching African-American enclaves for over 30 years. And so I have assembled a list of enclaves in South Jersey, and there's over 90 that date to the antebellum period of pre-Civil War. And most of them had direct involvement with the Underground Railroad, either as stations or as termini, as was the case with Milford. Milford was a termini. It was so far out in the country that slave catchers would not make the journey to go there. There were easier places to go, like Timbuktu outside of Mount Holly, and other settlements. So my original introduction to Milford was through Maurice Horner's History of Evesham Township. I don't necessarily agree with Maurice's contention that the Evans family did not give deeds for the property. I have not found a single instance where they did not give a deed to the free and fugitive blacks who were living in Milford. Right across the road in what then was Gloucester County, became Camden County, was the settlement of Pendleton. And so, for example, in Pendleton, the AME church that's still there today on Route 73 was incorporated in 1832 as the Pendleton AME Church. It didn't carry the name it does now, which I believe is Mount Zion. The burial ground for Mount Zion contains many descendants of the original settlers in Milford. The oldest land deed I have for Milford is 1828, when the Evans family sold to Lewis Kokkonen. And certainly by 1830, the Truitts are already there. Tillman buys his first land in 1834, as Patti mentioned. But the Truitt story is interesting because they were born in Cedar Creek 100 in Sussex County, Delaware, as free people of color. And then Tillman traveled out to Lancaster City after he married a woman from Maryland, was there long enough to have a son born, and then they migrated to Milford. So as I said, by the 1830 census, they're listed as being there. There's also just one second. Okay. Also, one of the great stories that we have for Milford is the story of a man named Nathan Meade, his enslavement name, or his taken name, Alexander Hemsley, where his enslaver was a professor of religion named Isaac Baggs in Queen Anne County, Maryland. And Alexander Hemsley says, my idea of freedom during my youth was that it was a state of liberty for the mind, that there was a freedom of thought which I could not enjoy unless I were free. That is, if I thought of anything beneficial for me, I should have liberty to execute it. My escape was not owing to any sudden impulse or fear of present punishment, but from a natural wish to be free. And had it not been for near and dear friends, I should not have remained in slavery long. So then he reports, I started for New Jersey, where I had been told that people were free and nobody would disturb me. I went 6 miles and then ambushed or hid himself to sleep for the night. On Monday night, I went 33 miles and found a good old Quaker, one with whom I stayed 3 weeks. At the expiration of my time, I went to Philadelphia. I made no tarry there. I didn't remain there, but went straight over into New Jersey. After a stay of 2 months at Cooper's Creek, I went to Evesham. And where he stayed on Cooper's Creek was Josiah Evans' mill. And Josiah was the cousin of John Evans. I'm sure that the connection was made for Alexander Hemsley to travel from across the Cooper River from Haddonfield in Cherry Hill today out to Milford. And he says, I went to Evesham, where I resided 8 or 9 years, being hired and getting my money. No one disturbed me all this time. I heard that I had been pursued by the son of my master, but then not hearing of me, he went back. I then received favorable offers to go to Northampton, and I removed there. He moved to Timbuktu outside of Mount Holly, and that's where he was caught. And I won't go into the rest of the case, except to say that he ended up in Canada with his family and became a bishop in the AME Church of Canada. His story is quite an interesting story to be told. So what we have is we have this first person narrative of somebody who did make the escape out to Milford. And so while the Tillmans are living there and they're free blacks, we also have the legacy of the escapees, those who slipped the bonds of involuntary servitude to travel to freedom. And that's why the Alexander Hemsley story is so near and dear to my heart. But the other major family that was in the Milford area was the Foreman family. They were also out in Lancaster at the same time as Tillman. I understand from Connie, I haven't looked into it myself yet, but I understand from Connie that some of them traveled to Haiti as missionaries for the AME Church in the 1830s. Milford grew up, and besides the AME Church across the road in Camden County, they built their own church in 1892. It was always a non-denominational church. They also had a school that was right adjacent to the church. And then by 1876, if you look at that Evesham Township map that's up on the screen, you'll find out that the township built a quote unquote colored school closer to Crescent Road, to Borton Mill Road. And the original schoolhouse was over by the church, right off Kenilworth Road, or actually off Thomas and Mill Road, continued into the 20th century and was served as a private residence for a member of the Foreman family. I think it's great that we still have one African American family remaining in Milford, and they've been guardians of certain aspects of the community out there. And I think that's really important for them. So I think the legacy for Evesham is to understand that they had a community which provided freedom for those who sought to escape their enslavement. There was one other small settlement in Evesham Township out near the apartment complex on Maple Avenue called Gilboa Hill. And there were about 6 African-American families who lived there. And they worked, some worked in a brickyard nearby and some dug marl for use on the farm fields. They're the only 2 known communities in Evesham Township, in current day Evesham Township, that I'm aware of.
Wow, Paul, thank you so much for sharing. Definitely one of the things that I enjoyed most about what you shared was hearing the narrative of one of the ancestors, hearing his thoughts, his experiences in his own words. And then you also kind of giving us a mental map for this area and where some of the individuals traveled and why they were where they were and why their communities were able to thrive because they were out of the reach of the slave catchers. That's interesting. That definitely answers some questions in my mind. Thank you so much.
Sure. I should also mention there were some local free blacks living in that area too, including Bowman Still, not related to Dr. James or William or Peter, but related to what I refer to as the South Jersey Stills, which descend from the Hug Plantation down in Belmar and Brooklawn, New Jersey.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, so now we're going to move on to our next panelist, Alice Andrews. She is representing Evesham's Evans family. So I'm just going to give her the floor now.
Thank you. We've heard the Evans family mentioned several times in this webinar, and I just wanted to give some background, a little bit more about the family's history in Evesham. And I say Evesham, not Evesham, because that's the way I was brought up, so forgive me. And I want to talk a little bit about Quakers and slavery because it's a subject that interests me, because I'm interested in social change and how people's minds are changed, because Quakers' minds were changed. And so I'd like to start, there's a slide that's the chart, the family tree, if you can find it.
Oh, the family tree actually, we couldn't actually see the writing too well,
Oh.
so that one we weren't able to put in.
Well, maybe, should I just share my screen then? Would that
Yeah,
work?
definitely. Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's the screen. Can you see it okay?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, good. Well, William Evans, I want to start with, is up there in the upper left-hand corner. He was the first Evans to come to this area. And as you see, he was a slave owner. He had come to this country with his father in 1677 with a lot of other Quakers who came to Burlington County at that time. And in 1701, he bought 1,000 acres in what's now Evesham Township. The Evanses obviously did quite well, and there were a lot of farms in the area that were his descendants' properties. And one of them is well known to people in Marlton. This is the Arts Center on the Indian Spring Golf Club campus. This was built in 1775 by one of William's descendants. But the fact that William Evans Jr., the first one, had slaves was a surprise to me when I learned it about 5 years ago. And it led me into thinking more and doing more research and talking with my cousins about how it was that this was the case, because Quakers pride themselves on having a history of being against slavery and in favor of nonviolence. How was it that we had ancestors that had slaves? And he didn't come with the slaves, we found. He didn't come with England with slaves, but he came to a place where a slave system was established, the Mid-Atlantic. A lot of the Quakers came through Barbados, of course, where there were the plantations. And there were slave markets in New York, and there were slave markets in North Jersey, and on a smaller scale in Philadelphia. So it wasn't that unusual for a prosperous Quaker to have slaves. And William's son, John, which you see over in the upper right-hand corner, also had slaves. He had 6 in his will, or 7. And we believe that his son did also. But William's son, Thomas, and all the rest of the group going down there did not. And it's interesting, Thomas was not as prosperous as his brother, William. His house was built in 1715. It's just the middle section of this picture. It actually now is the Gibson House Community Center in Marlton. It had to be rebuilt because it fell apart in the 1950s when they were trying to restore it. Another person who's interesting is the son of this William, who is Joshua. You'll see him on the chart. Joshua was very active agitator against slavery. I never had heard a thing about him, and I found out all this just a few years ago. He left a journal that showed he was deeply religious. He was born in 1731. He was very friendly with John Woolman, who was a famous abolitionist in Mount Holly. John Woolman was famous for getting the Quakers, arouse the Quakers against slavery, and for having a major influence on the abolition movement, and for his journal, which is a classic of spiritual writing. Anyway, Joshua was a companion of John Woolman, Joshua Evans, and he traveled on foot and horseback to the Carolinas, to Georgia, to Tennessee, and up north. This would have been in the 1750s. He recorded the conditions of Africans and Native Americans in the places he visited. He writes in his journal about how he labored with individual Quaker slave owners, one-on-one, about the evil of what they were doing. He refused to use the products of slave labor, such as cotton and sugar. He wore only natural colored clothes, since indigo dye was produced by slave labor. He wrote in his journal, "It seemed as if the cries of slaves in the West India Islands reached my ears both day and night, in a special manner when I partook of things procured from their labor. At length, I did believe it was required of me not to use any longer such articles as I deemed the fruits of their labor." So this, the mid-1700s, was a time of great turmoil within Quakerism. Families and meetings were struggling about slavery. They were struggling about the French and Indian War and whether it should be supported. And Evans' men and women, no doubt, went to the contentious annual meeting of Quakers that occurred in 1758, the Delaware Valley Quakers. This meeting issued a statement clearly against importing, buying, selling, or keeping slaves for life. And this was a turning point, 1758. There'd been other earlier calls and pronouncements against the slave trade, but this was different. Then in 1776, the same group of Quakers in the Delaware Valley decided that unless a person freed his slaves, he couldn't remain a Quaker in good standing. That was 1776. But even here, there's some qualification, because freedom did not mean immediate freedom. It could be promised in a person's will. So that meant that the enslaved person might have to wait years and years until they were free. Okay, so meanwhile, slavery's expanding. The Fugitive Slave Law is passed in 1793. The abolition movement gains force. And Enoch Evans, down there in the middle of the left-hand side, was a founding member of the New Jersey Society for the Abolition of Slavery. The society pushed for changes in New Jersey law. He was also one of the founders of Cropwell Meeting, which Damon mentioned earlier. It's a picture of Cropwell Meeting in the mid-1800s. The meeting house is still there, of course, and active, has a small but active group of worshipers. And then a turn to the Underground Railroad, which we've mentioned already, the houses in Kenilworth, and what's known and not known about what happened there with the Underground Railroad. I just want to mention two houses that were Evans houses. One is right down the street from Cropwell Meeting House, right where the old Martin Pike meets Route 70. It was called the Burroughs Evans House, and it was owned by the Bottom Thomas there in the middle of the chart. No record exists to know exactly if it was on the Underground Railroad, but a cabinet was discovered that had a hidden space in it. Unfortunately, the house has been demolished, so that happened in the earliest part of the 20th century. But there is another house that the same Thomas owned that you'll recognize. It's obviously still standing. It's in Pine Grove on the corner of Tuckerton and Old Martin Pike, and it's known as the Isaac Evans House. And it was very likely on the Underground Railroad that went between two chimneys in the attic that led to a passageway through the walls down to the basement. So a person could hide or go from the attic to the basement undetected. And I just have one more story at the bottom right-hand corner of my chart, if I have time here. A man named Thomas Haynes Dudley. You may have heard of him. He was a nephew of the man I mentioned, Joshua Evans. He distinguished himself in 1845 when the wife and 3 children of Roland Johnson, a free black man on the Gardner farm in Mount Laurel, were kidnapped by slave catchers. And Dudley disguised himself as a slave trader and chased
Uh-oh, did we lose Patty?
I think
Alice.
Alice lost her signal.
Oh, Patty's there. Okay, Alice lost her signal. Okay. Okay, we'll give her a minute to rejoin. I thought some of the things that she was talking about were so interesting, especially with the Quakers giving up some of their conveniences because of their moral compass. Morality in the face of convenience, especially before mass production, would have been hard. How do you find things that aren't produced by slavery? I think that a lot of people find that challenge now when you try to look for things that are not produced by child labor. And then you're like, oh, but certain modern conveniences with big corporation names. So that's pretty interesting. We're gonna give her another minute, see if she can come back.
I'll also mention that when I was researching my book, I found a publication that was written by, in 1840 by the Religious Society of Friends of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And in the book, they describe the slave trade as a practice of unprincipled men. And that book is online, so anybody can find it on Google Books. And then I just also wanted to mention that the date that Paul mentioned, that my ancestor Tillman Truitt, his deed with Evans's, was dated on April 13th, which is actually my birthday. So,
Ah.
so 125 years later.
Nice. Oh, no, Alice was here. Now she's gone again. Okay. All right. Well, we'll actually, when she comes back, hopefully if she gets her signal, we'll get a chance to let her wrap up a little bit. But we wanted to move on now to Dolly Marshall, who we have on. She is a historical preservationist, an activist, a researcher, and a genealogist and lecturer. So she has lots of amazing things to share with us. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us a little bit more of our history.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I appreciate it so much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me as a guest. Hi, Patty and Mrs. Margaret. It's so nice to see you in person. We have corresponded, but we've never met. So this is great. So I guess I'll introduce give you a little overview of my connection to the Evesham Township. I was asked to, John Volpa of the Past, Present, and Future Subcommittee reached out to me last year and asked me to assist with cemetery conservation. He presented the Milford Burial Ground that the committee members had been looking to find ways to conserve and research. So I came in, while all this activity was already taking place. And I figure, because is what I do. I'm a cemetery preservationist. My topic is African American cemetery preservation. I'm going to share my screen, bear with me. Let's see if it'll let me. There we go. So I'm going to share with you what I call best practices for the conservation of sacred spaces and the people that are buried there. I learned the significance of this from my parents and grandparents, who instilled in me that cemeteries were where the living and deceased intersect, and were places of remembrance. So my historical context, it's just this: cemeteries, African-American cemeteries, were particularly vulnerable. The ones that did exist quickly became filled to capacity, and there was a need, you know, for African Americans to be buried, but they were barred and prohibited from being buried in whites only cemeteries. This is an example from a newspaper article from the Courier Post, 1901. It was on the front page about how the prominent African-American citizens, the community of the city, got together to ask why they couldn't be buried in the cemetery. They were refused because of an 1836 charter that explicitly stated that the city cemeteries were for whites only. So that's how Mount Peace came about. I'm not going to go into the history of Mount Peace. I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the people and some of the projects I'm involved in, because what I do, I feel can be applied to places such as the Milford Burying Ground. This is Reverend Alexander Heritage Newton, who's one of our original directors, founding directors of Mount Peace Cemetery Association. He was a Civil War veteran, a reverend, active in the AME Church for 50+ years, pastored in 2 well-known churches in Camden City. He was a delegate to the New Jersey State Convention, also a Freemason, and he wrote an autobiography in 1910 called Out of the Briars. So one of my initiatives in cemetery preservation is not only preserving the landscape, restoring the landscape, headstones, the undulating ground, but it's also preserving the narratives. And the narratives are vast. The narratives encompass a lot of untold history of the Black experience. So I seek to learn and then educate others on this hidden history. This relates to Evesham and any city or town where there were Black settlements. So on behalf of Reverend Alexander Heritage Newton, Mount Peace was designated by the National Park Service just last September as a National Underground Railroad site, a part of the Network to Freedom program. And this not only is a distinguished honor, but it also helps to bring awareness to the public of individuals such as Mr. Newton, who at 17 was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and he details in his book many daring escapes. Also, this designation makes people aware of Lawnside, where Mount Peace is located, that the municipality was also a stop on the Underground Railroad. So these are some of the programs and outreach that I do as a preservationist. I do, and historian, I do walking tours, which is very important because the deceased need help from the living. So cemeteries, I feel, are places where we as the living can continue to learn. So these walking tours that I conduct give visitors the opportunity to learn about the history, about the community, about surrounding communities. I don't just talk about Mount Peace, I talk about history in general, military history, arts. So it really connects on a lot of different levels and topics. In particular, we do headstone restoration classes, and these classes are led by volunteers. These are volunteers in this photograph teaching our visitors how to clean cemetery headstones. So this too can be adopted anywhere, not just at Mount Peace, any cemetery, and visitors can be empowered that they are a part of preserving history. We also do a lot of programming with the Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts of America. They come in and do service days, and they also, while they're doing service, they learn about Black history. This is another initiative that I started called the Camden Black History Profile. Is just making sure people are aware of the connections of not only the city of Camden, but Camden County, how integral it is connected to Mount Peace as a whole. Mount Peace is also certified as a wildlife habitat. This is another initiative that hopefully other African-American cemeteries could adopt, because what's unique about African-American cemeteries is usually the trees and the burial plants. A lot of people could not afford headstones, and therefore plants would be used as grave markers. And as you see in the middle is a great example of a grave marker, ornamental plant called a yucca plant, Y-U-C-C-A. And the yucca plant signifies, it's symbolic to ward off evil spirits, but it's also a tangible indicator that if you don't see a headstone, 9 times out of 10, that's a person's burial. Mount Peace is a level 1 arboretum, which was also a volunteer-driven initiative taken on by a community member outside of the community where Mount Peace is located, that saw, articles and lectures, saw our website and wanted to get involved. So this too can be adopted in the township of Evesham with the Milford Burying Ground, so that it no longer fades into obscurity. We also do service learning. Our cemetery is an outdoor classroom. We partner with a lot of different schools of all different ages, and they come and do service hours and help clean the cemetery, maintain the cemetery, and they also learn history. We help the descendant community. We do a lot of different activities. We do records research. We do physical locating of ancestors if we can. We are in the process of trying to remap the cemetery so it's easier and accessible for visitors. We'll help descendants to connect to other ancestors in other African-American cemeteries. And my work and the work of other preservationists and historians reclaims and sets new ways to interpret this history with truth and dignity. So because everyone desires a sense of place and belonging, and the township of Evesham is no different. We also are embarking on recording oral histories. That's me collaborating with the Perkins Institute for the Arts. So it's a great way to get other organizations outside of genealogical or preservation organizations to partner with you. And we hope to connect other descendants to this organization so they too can record their histories, because in the African-American community, a lot of our histories were oral histories. And these are some of the resources that I personally utilize and share with other people, our visitors. And we also have events. This was an event called Decoration Day, which a lot of people know now as Memorial Day. Memorial Day in the past would purposely or intently, I should say, was a day to honor all those that lost their lives during wartime, that served, enlisted, in the military, and we decorate the graves. So this too can be adopted at any sacred space in any community to get together, tell those stories of military personnel, whether they're your ancestors or not, and go and decorate their graves. So my journey, it is led me into a lot of different directions. I started on my own quest for finding my roots and my ancestry, and it's connected me to a lot of different branches, so to speak. And I have 14 ancestors buried in Mount Peace, but I have ancestors buried in many cemeteries, and still yet found out. I shouldn't say recently, it's 5 years, but in the last 5 years, my direct connection to James Fortin, who was also an abolitionist, born a free man of color in Philadelphia. And he was a civil rights activist and a sailmaker, and at his time, the wealthiest African-American in the city of Philadelphia. And he used his wealth to fund a lot of African American charities and causes, such as the Anti-Slavery Society. There's an exhibit currently running at the Museum of the American Revolution on the life of James Fortin and his family, my family, since I am a descendant of. And I just can't implore more to people to take that first step and be motivated in, coming into a cemetery, coming into a space, and really being aware that it's living history. That's how I relate to a lot of my students. It's living history. It's not just a place that's forgotten. So I appreciate being involved in other, organizations that are taking on this work because it's important. We have to acknowledge and recognize the past, including every injustice and every tragedy and triumph, because this leads us to better understanding for ourselves and of each other. And it's this collective history that we share that will guide us to a better future. And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dolly. That was amazing. You shared so much good information. And one of the things that stuck with me the most was West African funerary culture is known all around the world as something that is with a lot of pomp, circumstance, and we kind of see the echoes of that in African American culture, even though some of the nuance was lost because of slavery. So when you said, I wrote it down, having best practices in the conservation of sacred spaces, I was like, yes. And I just loved it so much. And what you're doing with making sure that the next generation also has this same passion and understands their history is amazing. Education through service is one of the most impactful learning methodologies. So thank you so much for sharing everything that you have. Okay. And Alice, you're back. Uh-oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, yeah, I don't know what happened. I just said that one more story, so I'm finished. That's good. I did want to say that for me, one of the benefits of this is this connections, finding connections that I didn't know I had, like connections to Patti's family, and then more connections to Patti's family with the visiting nurse stories. Just you keep uncovering things, and it's so fascinating and sort of heartwarming the way we're together in this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Councilwoman Cooper, if you want to add.
Yes, so a lot of what we wanted to capture here was the stories, and I thank you all again on behalf of Mayor Jackie Veazey and all of council, all of our residents here in Evesham who are really fascinated with the stories that collectively our history has to tell in Evesham, aka Marlton. I do appreciate the tidbits that were shared today, and I know there's a lot more that we'll continue to share as the stories unfold. But our job here in government is to make sure we tell all the stories so people feel included, and that our future generations, as Coriel shared, know what those stories are. And we will continue to unearth the stories here in Evesham. We will continue to reveal these legacy stories as well as the spaces that are marked, that we know of as our underground railroads. We're working with the state through historic commission and societies, through grant opportunities, just to be able to capture the Underground Railroad along the trail throughout the state of New Jersey. And so there are initiatives with the state to make that happen. And we will ensure that Evesham stays on the map and that your stories are captured as well. I think the other thing with the rich history that we have here is to make sure that people know we're a destination. And while Burlington County has an amazing legacy story from Louise Callaway, the Underground Railroad Museum does capture Evesham there, and we're very proud of that fact, as well as the legacy of the Evans Cooper families. So we will continue to make sure people are a destination for the knowledge and that it's established part of the tapestry throughout African American history in our community, throughout the state, and wherever the spaces are that we can leave the mark so people don't forget, we're going to make sure we do so. So on the Gina Lee timeline, the website that was captured, that was being shared, as you click on each of the areas, you will see some of those pictures, some of those locations, and then we will have the additional contact information that can be shared for that story to be told. And you can review videos, you can capture the full story of Louise Callaway. But Coriel wanted to leave us with that, if we need to share that again, so folks can see that, just a snippet from the story that Louise Callaway has been sharing. For any who do not know, she has transitioned from the space in this world. She will have a homegoing celebration March 12th, and that information can be found on Burlington County's Underground Railroad site. But we did want to leave you with that and thank her and her family for continuing to share the story. And anyone can visit the Burlington County Underground Railroad site. They're open Thursday through Sunday, 8 to 4. And again, if you can access websites, but Evesham Township website will also have some of this shared information. So I thank you all again. I honor each and every story, and the story is untold. We will continue to share that here as we continue to celebrate Black History Month, not just this month, but each and every month and every day, every opportunity that we get in all the spaces that we spend our time. So Coriel, I turn it over to you to see if we can capture that video for the audience.
So all of the panelists coming on and sharing your knowledge and your stories, thank you so much. It was so significant. And Miss Callaway did pass earlier this month, but we do have a little video underneath her picture. She's there with Shannon Higginbotham. Just a little bit about what she had to say about the history of this area and what it meant to her and what she hoped it meant to future generations. And then we'll also drop the link to this site in the chat one more time, just so you have it. And then, so we're gonna click on it now. It's the little yellow button right there. Yep.
New Jersey. It was like a gateway to the north. I want young people to know about the history. A greater understanding about the Underground Railroad, that it's not a myth. There's a lot of history in New Jersey. I want them to know about slavery. It's what our people went through, and it's you know, our ancestors, and it's me. And I'm so proud of our people.
So just in her own words, what she felt about local history, how proud she was of her descendants, and what she hoped future generations could get from that local history. All right, I hope you guys found this as entertaining and significant and touching as I did. So I hope you guys have a great night. Thanks again to all our panelists.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good to
you.
meet
Have a
you.
good evening.
Good night.
Good night.